Ben Affleck adjusted the hood of his tattered jacket and looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror. The man staring back at him was unrecognizable. His neatly trimmed beard was now unruly and streaked with gray from the makeup. His designer clothes were replaced with layers of grimy, mismatched garments that smelled faintly of mildew. The transformation was complete, and for the first time in years, Ben Affleck didn't look like a Hollywood superstar. He looked like a man who had been beaten down by life, a homeless man. This wasn't for a movie role. This wasn't part of some blockbuster script. This was real. Ben had taken on this disguise for a purpose far beyond the silver screen. He had seen too many viral videos, heard too many stories about police officers mistreating the homeless, and he wanted to see it for himself. Was the system truly broken, or were these isolated incidents? There was only one way to find out. He had to live it. Ben stepped out of the dingy motel room he had rented under a fake name. The cool morning air hit his face as he clutched the straps of his worn-out backpack. Inside were a few props, a crumpled cardboard sign that read, "Hungry, anything helps," a tin cup for collecting spare change, and a hidden recording device to document everything. He had told only a handful of trusted people about this project. His close friend Matt Damon thought he was insane but supportive, while his publicist begged him not to do it, fearing the potential backlash if things went wrong. But Ben was determined. This wasn't about his career. This was about uncovering the truth. The first day was quiet. Ben chose a spot near a busy park, sitting on a bench with his sign propped up beside him. He kept his head down, observing the world around him. Most people walked by without even glancing in his direction. A few tossed coins into his cup, their faces a mix of pity and discomfort. A group of teenagers snickered as they passed, one of them muttering, "Get a job." It wasn't until the afternoon that he had his first encounter with the police. A patrol car pulled up to the curb, and two officers stepped out. Ben's heart raced as they approached. One of them, a tall man with a stern expression, stopped in front of him. "You can't sit here," the officer said, his tone flat. "Move along." Ben looked up, feigning confusion. "I'm not bothering anyone." "I said move along," the officer repeated, his hand resting on the baton at his belt. His partner stood a few steps back, arms crossed, watching silently. Ben hesitated. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He stood slowly, picking up his sign and cup. "I just need a few more minutes," he said softly. The officer's jaw tightened. "If I come back and you're still here, I'll have to take you in for loitering. Do you understand?" Ben nodded and walked away, his heart pounding. The interaction had been tense but not violent. Still, the officer's tone and body language left no doubt about his disdain. Ben wondered how someone truly homeless, without his resources or hidden safety net, would feel in that situation. As the days went on, Ben's experiences varied. Some officers were kind, offering him directions to shelters or handing him bottles of water. Others were dismissive or outright hostile. He started to notice patterns, how they treated him depending on the neighborhood, the time of day, or whether other people were watching. He also encountered other homeless individuals who shared their stories, each one more heartbreaking than the last. One night, while sleeping on a bench in a secluded area, Ben was startled awake by the sound of footsteps. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and he saw two officers approaching. He sat up quickly, shielding his eyes from the light. "What are you doing here?" one of them demanded. "Just trying to get some sleep," Ben replied, his voice steady, despite the fear creeping in. "This isn't a shelter," the officer said, his tone sharp. "You need to move." Before Ben could respond, the other officer spoke up. "Wait a minute, I think I know this guy." Ben's stomach dropped. Had he been recognized? His disguise was thorough, but it wasn't foolproof. The officer leaned closer, peering at Ben's face. "Yeah, you were panhandling near the park last week. We warned you then, didn't we?" Ben relaxed slightly, realizing the officer hadn't recognized him as Ben Affleck, the actor, but rather as a recurring presence in the area. He decided to play along. "I'm just trying to get by," he said quietly. "Well, you can't stay here," the first officer said. "Move it." Ben gathered his things and walked away, his hidden recorder capturing every word. As he turned the corner, he couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and sadness. The officer's behavior wasn't outright abusive, but it was clear they saw him as a nuisance rather than a person. The real turning point came a week later. Ben had set up near a busy intersection, holding his sign and observing the interactions around him. A young woman, no older than 20, approached him. Her clothes were worn, and she carried a small backpack. "You're new around here," she said, sitting down beside him. Ben glanced at her, surprised. "What makes you say that?" She smiled faintly. "I've been on the streets for a while. You learn to recognize the regulars." They talked for hours, sharing stories and experiences. Her name was Emily, and she had run away from an abusive home. She spoke about the challenges of living on the streets, from finding food to avoiding dangerous situations. Her resilience amazed Ben, but her vulnerability broke his heart. As the sun set, Emily stood to leave. "Stay safe out here," she said, giving him a small wave. "You too," Ben replied, watching her disappear into the crowd. That night, Ben couldn't sleep. Emily's story haunted him. He realized that his experiment was only scratching the surface of a much deeper issue. The problem wasn't just how the police treated the homeless, it was how society as a whole had failed them. The final days of his project were the most challenging. Ben had grown accustomed to the physical discomfort, but the emotional toll was heavier than he had anticipated. He had seen kindness and cruelty, hope and despair. He had documented hours of footage, capturing the raw reality of life on the streets. When the project ended, Ben returned to his normal life, but he was forever changed. The footage he had gathered became a powerful documentary that shed light on the struggles of the homeless and the systemic issues they faced. The response was overwhelming, sparking conversations and calls for change. Through it all, Ben remained humbled by the experience. He knew he couldn't solve the problem on his own, but he hoped his work would inspire others to take action. And in the back of his mind, he often thought of Emily, wondering where she was and hoping she had found the safety and happiness she deserved.